Okay.
Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Professor Roland Ennos. Professor Ennos is a professor of biological science at the University Hall in England. He is the author of successful textbooks on plants, biomechanics, and statistics. And today we will be speaking about his latest book, The Age of Wood, our most useful material and the construction of civilization. Professor Ennos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Anna.
So, Professor Ennos, as I study history, not that I was a devout history student, but I learned about things such as the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Steel Age, and so many other stages in our civilization. But I have never heard of the Wood Age, which is something that you highlight in your book, and you insist that maybe we should consider our history as, wood being a great part or contributor to our civilization.
Well, that's right. Yes, looking through, as I've been an academic and taught all about materials and structures, how animals and plants work, and going to museums, going to churches, it gradually struck me that, in fact, wood has been the most important material throughout our evolutionary history. And in fact, even from before we became human beings at all, for millions and millions of years, we've been surrounded by wood, we've used wood, and wood is still the most used structural material we use. And yet people just ignore it and don't seem to realize its importance. And
Right.
I was really keen on actually emphasizing that in this book.
Okay, so that's great about this book. I wonder if we could find out a little bit about you. You are a professor in so many things. What is it? Biomechanics, statistics, plants. Can you give us a little bit of how is it that you became interested in this science, and then how is it that you began writing books about it?
Well, I've always been interested in how things work, and in fact, when I was a child, I was both interested in animals and I was interested in physics and buildings and engineering. As it turned out, my maths wasn't as good enough to become a physicist, so I moved into this subject called biomechanics, which is the engineering of plants and animals. It combined both my interests. And initially, I studied how insects' wings are designed, but then moved into plants, looking at how their roots anchor them in the soil, and then moved gradually all across looking at mechanics of wood and trees. And more recently, I've also been researching the benefits, the physical benefits of trees in towns. It's a great thing being an academic. You can do all sorts of things, and I had to teach quite a lot, so I taught statistics because I was better at maths than most biologists. So I then wrote a book on statistics to get a bit of money from that, and also books on plants and trees because I wanted to tell people about how marvelous they were. And that's how gradually it became that I gradually learned more and more about wood.
And in a roundabout way, you have also become a historian because in order to put this book together, you have to do a whole bunch of history research and, put it together
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense to all of us.
Yes, it was. I mean, I have also been interested in history, and I was very lucky. I was brought up in the outskirts of London, and I used to cycle past Hampton Court, which is a great royal palace, on the way to school, past lots of what used to be country of the famous people like Michael Faraday and so it's always been surrounding me, history, and so it's been a really fortunate that I've managed to then combine that interest with the science. And I believe that too often people get stuck in little ghettos where they're just interested in their own particular field, and it's much more important to try to link things together. So to make much more sense of the world around us.
And I guess in your interest of linking things together, you are also quite a traveler, because as I'm reading your book, you mentioned, oh, well, I was walking around in this forest and in this other forest. And, you know, just and as I'm reading your book, I'm also going into my Google Maps to find out where are all these locations.
Oh,
So it is amazing. I wonder, do you travel every year? What's your traveling like?
I've travelled a reasonable amount, but not a great deal. But I mean, I've travelled to places like Borneo, and when I was a child, I could never imagine actually visiting that place. I had a book on like mammals of Southeast Asia, but it was amazing that back in the 1990s, I first managed to visit that, and I've been to Trinidad and to China, and just a few visits, you start to see how different the world is, how different places. I've been to North America. I've never been to South America, but when you go to places, it's fascinating just how different they are. Even North America from Europe, totally different, and you can make something out of even the shortest visit if you look around you and investigate what the place looks like and what people think in those places.
Okay, and then within your field of being that you have so many interests, you wrote a book not too long ago called Trees. Could you tell us
Mm.
what was the impetus to write that book, and yeah, give us some more information about it.
Oh, right. Well, trees, most books on trees just tell you which species are which and tell you how to identify them. But having worked on trees and seen how marvelous they are, I wanted to tell people about how, first of all, like how trees work, to answer questions that people might want to ask. How trees work, how do they get water to their leaves? How do they stand up against the wind? So how the wood is designed, how they anchor in the ground, why there are so many different sorts of trees, and why you have different sorts of trees in different parts of the world. And so to give people a broad overview of the trees around them so they can make sense of and say, well, this tree's here because of that. And I think that's a better way of looking at things rather than just naming things, which in my opinion doesn't really give you much information.
Okay, and from what I gathered, that first book was something what it guided you into writing this second book, The Age of Wood. So, can you give us more information about what was going on in your mind when you decided to write this book?
With the age of in the trees book, I ended up with a sort of chapter about trees and man, and then I started to realize that we were using that man had used wood an awful lot, and I was very lucky because one of my one of in my research I met a lady, Susanna Thorpe, who has had theories about how orangutans move around the forest and about the evolution of bipedality, about how humans started to walk upright, and together we managed to have get a PhD student, Adam, to go to look at orangutans in the forests of Indonesia, and start to look at, in fact, how orangutans build their nests. And it struck me then that our relationship with wood began many, many millions of years earlier than we might imagine, back in the days when the primates were in the trees, when the orangutans were learning how to build nests out of wood, how they were learning how to go between trees without falling down. And that's when my mind really got excited about writing about wood age, about how important wood has been for humans throughout our whole history.
Okay, and you divide your book in 4 sections. So I'm just going to name them. So number 1 was wood and the human evolution. Number 2, building civilization. Section 3, wood and in the industrial area. And number 4, facing the consequences. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about section number 2, building civilization. How is wood? Yeah, what's the place of wood in us building a civilization?
Well, yes, I mean, you could say that civilization began with people farming, and rather than being hunter-gatherers, then they could grow their own crops, and then they started to live in villages, then into towns and cities. Uh, and wood isn't, and the way that wood is involved in the building of civilization is that when farming spread from the Middle East across Europe and Asia, all the land that could be farmed was actually covered in trees because that's where the best climate is and where the best growing conditions. And so to build our civilization, we had to clear the forest. We had to start to learn how to cut wood to use it, and then we could start using wood to make nice big buildings, to make ships, to make boats, and that's when building all the important parts of civilization, houses, transport, tools, that's when that became really important, and wood was the central material with which we built all of those things.
You also talk about wood being, yeah, at the beginning, you talk about the British Navy running out of poles to make their, what is it, yeah,
The
their
mast.
ships. Yes, exactly. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that piece of history when you talk about, oh, wow, I have it here in my notes, the pine tree riots, and where the navy the English Navy couldn't get enough pines to build their ships.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting story and one which is not well enough known. Everyone knows about the Boston Tea Party, even we British know about that. But the Pine Tree Riot goes back to the problem that the British had in getting masts for their ships. As ships got bigger and bigger, and Britain was always fighting the French uh, for supremacy in the world. The ships needed masts which were about 200 foot high, and Britain, we couldn't get them from our own country because we just don't have that sort of tree grows in Britain. Most of ours are sort of short, broadleaf trees, and the best trees, the only ones that we could get, was to source them from the American colonies, where there was huge white pine forests, which we found amazing because they were so much taller and straighter than anything that was growing in Europe at that time. So in order to make sure we had a supply, the British did a rather policy blunder. They decided to sort of requisition them and to mark all these big trees and to say they belonged to the British Crown. That was not very popular, obviously, with the American colonists who were living there at the time, and they kept on they cut those trees down and use them themselves. It all came to a head in a place in New Hampshire called Weir, where the the British controller of forests came to sort things out, and he was actually attacked. His horse had its tail cut off. He was sort of tarred and feathered, and then rushed out of town. People were so angry about the fact that the British were stealing their trees, and it became a real cause célèbre. It happened just about a year before, and probably inspired the Boston Tea Party, and it was a major source of the cause of the American Revolutionary War. And of course, during that war, the Americans cut off the supply of masts to Britain, which is one reason why the Americans won the Revolutionary War and became the great nation that we know it today.
And do you know why the British wouldn't just pay fair price for the trees? I mean, the French did. They would buy trees from the colonies. Why wouldn't the British do the same?
Um, I don't know. It's one of those. It's one of those mysteries. It's a question of British arrogance, maybe, or the policy had worked in Britain, and so they thought maybe it would work with the Americans. But the Americans were more obviously independent-minded, and they didn't want their things to be everything to be taken away from them by the British. They weren't and forced to pay taxes and these sort of things.
I see. Okay, and can you tell us now what's the future of wood? I mean, I feel like we are destroying forests. We are certainly destroying the Amazon, and there are companies who are buying what is it, carbon credits in order to compensate for the damage that they do in nature. But when you put it all together, are we going to just destroy all the forests, or are we going to be able to survive and keep them alive?
Well, it's on a knife edge, I think, at the moment. Most of the forests now are being cut down, not to provide timber, but just to clear the land, particularly in the Amazon. They're clearing the land in the Amazon to grow soya and maize, and they're clearing the land in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Borneo. They're clearing it to have palm oil plantations. So we're clearing it for things for ourselves to eat, but not things that are particularly useful. All the soya bean and maize are used to feed cattle so that people can have large numbers of cheap burgers, and the palm oil is used to make lots of cheap food products and pharmaceutical products as well. It's not really necessary to do this, and I think that it's up to us in the West, in the rich countries of the North and the West, to cut down on our consumption, and it's only then that we will stop cutting down those forests to clear them for this totally unsustainable form of consumption.
Okay, this is not part of your book, but I've been reading here and there that there are more construction companies that are building taller buildings out of wood. I wonder if you have any feedback about this new movement.
It's a big new movement. It's called mass timber, and it's particularly popular in North America and in Scandinavia. And what people are doing is it's a totally new way of using timber. Normally, it's limited, but the size is limited by the size of a tree trunk. But what they do with wood laminates is they make lots of little planks, and then have called finger joints at the ends, and they can join those together like your fingers of your two hands combining. They can stick those together. They can put loads of those planks side to side, top to bottom, curve them round. They can produce beams of any size, and those big, thick, huge beams are being used to build a new range of modern buildings, from greenhouses to right up to skyscrapers. And wooden skyscrapers are getting taller and taller. The largest is in Norway, and it's about 270 foot high, and there's more even taller ones planned. It uses about about a fifth of the weight of a concrete structure, and uses much less energy, and has much lower carbon footprint. So there's great ability to use wood once again as the premium construction material.
So I see our civilization still depends on this prime material, which is called wood. Professor Ennos, I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of your book and where can people follow you?
My book is called The Age of Wood, with a subtitle, Our Most Useful Material and the Construction of Civilization, available in all good bookshops and on Amazon and all websites.
And I noticed that the book cover is the book cover is different whether I look in Amazon in the States and Amazon in England.
Yeah, there's different. It's interesting because by American publishers, they said that I was going to call it the Wood Age, because in England we talk about the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, etc. In America, there isn't an Iron Age and Bronze Age, and they preferred to call it the Age of Wood, which is something which resonates more in Americans' minds, because they look back to the sort of 17th century up to the 19th century, when Americans see themselves as living in an age of wood, where almost all of their materials were made of wood, and they produced totally book covers as well. So I'm not. It's exactly the same, apart from one or two words in either side of the Atlantic. It's just a case of differences between Britain and America. There's still very big cultural differences between Britain and America, which I don't think people appreciate enough.
Yes, of course, we don't have a Stone Age or a Bronze Age over here. You guys brought everything that from Europe. Professor Ennos, thank you so much for your time.
So thank you very much. I've greatly talking to you, Ala.